All right. Hey. Thanks for tuning in. This is a very serious chapter. Um, the reason why I'm tagging this as a serious topic is based on our society's heavy focus on mental health awareness and mental health situations. Um, I would urge you to read the blog post that I have connected to my link tree on narcissistic abuse. In that specific article that I first posted in 2017, I do talk about a more condensed version of everything that's happened to me. Um, I do mention a little bit about my stepmom, and one of the, I think, one of the biggest reasons that I was even going through most of the situations that were happening is because, my stepmom is a psych nurse. I think that her being a psych nurse amplified a lot of the scenarios that were happening. I do believe that the advantage that someone working, the advantage that someone would have working in the medical field means that if they want to twist, bend, or manipulate situations, they can easily take the mental health route. And I believe that that's what my stepmom was trying to do to me. This chapter, or voice snippet chapter, is called Psyche Medical Strategy. So, what I refer to when I'm using this title that often happens in narcissistic abuse is people in authority to the victim's life. So it could be anyone, it could be their neighbors, it could be teachers, it could be employers, it could be parents. So anyone who holds a position of authority in the victim's life, pinning mental delay or mental disease as a reason to build false scenarios on whoever the target is. So in this case, it took me a while to kind of see that this is what my stepmother was doing. Um, it, I was in such denial that she would be capable of doing something like this. But when I realized that in everything surrounding me, this would have been the strongest way for her to find ways to cripple my life, delay my career, block my progress, cripple my ability to earn money, as I mentioned before, make my life a living hell. This is the way I think that many people connected to her were helping her to be able to do this. So when I look back over the years, there was constant suggestion of years, so constant suggestion for years, kind of like hinting at me having a bigger or greater medical issue than what actually happened. So I'll explain. So let's say, for example, I explain something to her that's happening to me in my neighborhood or around my home. She'll turn around and say, you should probably report that to your doctor. That's an example. Sorry. Um, let's say, for example, she would bring up something and I don't remember the detail. Instead of just brushing it off as a non-factor, she'll probably make a suggestion like, you should probably go check that out and talk to your doctor about it. So I would constantly observe her bringing it up that it should go to my doctor. And I didn't quite pick up right away that this was a strategy. One of the other ways that I find was used with my family was that I started to become isolated, and it wasn't really something I was doing. it was something that was coordinated. So I mentioned before, I stopped getting invited to family events, and I think that was done by design because my stepmother wanted to force me into submission for the way she wanted me to be for her. So one of the ways is don't tell your sister, don't invite her. Don't ask your sister to come. Don't tell your sister anything. So I started noticing bouts of isolation. Another way that she would set up the scenario is just verbal abuse. So anytime I would call her or talk to her or connect with her, she was constantly going back and forth. So she would be kind and polite, or she would flip it and then be rude and condescending. And I realized that it became a strategy. So I want to look back to like maybe 2011, 2012, 2013. I was going through a lot of, um, that's, again, I mentioned that's when a lot of the stalking was happening. So I was going through a lot of scenarios where I would get strange messages on Facebook. I had people following me around. And I remember that I started telling her a little bit about what I was experiencing. And sometimes she would be silent and she wouldn't say anything. But then her first suggestion was, did you want to go to therapy? And I would ask her, well, why do you think I should do that? And she wouldn't really have an answer. And she would say, I just want you to feel better. And I said to her, but, you know, I'm not feeling good, not because of myself. I'm not feeling good because of my environment. So in this case, it was issues with people at the job I was working at or people showing up near around my home. And so when she made mention of therapy, I felt weird at the time and I declined, not because I do not want to have treatment, it's because I felt that she was inserting that as a topic or an issue. And one of the things I told her is that I feel that if I were to go that route, even though nothing's wrong, this is something that someone can use in the future to use against me. And I don't want it to mess up any of my career goals for the future. Even though people are talking about mental health more often, I really feel that some people use it as a weapon against innocent people. So I will never forget, she said, if you're feeling out of sorts, let me bring you some medication to maybe calm your mind and help you sleep. And I trusted her and I agreed with her because I thought maybe it was going to be helpful. But when she suggested that maybe I was depressed, I thought about it. I said, you know what? People who are surrounded by narcissists and manipulators often feel this way because they're being treated this way. So it's not necessarily because they're actually having these symptoms naturally. They're being treated a certain way over a long period of time so they can feel a certain way. And yes, I was going through a lot at work, school, and home. So I'll never forget. I went to stay with her, and she administered an antidepressant and asked if I needed therapy. And she concluded, this is another thing too. She concluded in her assessment of what I was going through on a daily basis that the reason why I was going through it is because I was suffering from abandonment issues with my previous family. So my mother and my father. And I'm like, where did she come up with this analysis? You know? I'm like, where did she come up with this diagnosis and why does she think it's true? Now I want to explain something. After this little segment that happened where I was feeling out of sorts at my job, at school, at work, um, I was also, I think that year, so about 2012, 2013, I was in and out of the emergency room. I was having heart palpitations and I was having heart issues. And what I thought was really odd about me having these heart issues is that every time I went to the hospital, the doctor kept saying, "We checked everything and nothing's wrong with you. You're completely okay. Your heart's really strong. You're very healthy." And I'll never forget those 4 or 5 times I was at the hospital for heart palpitations. Each and every time, my stepmom was at the hospital with me. And when I look back and the doctor wasn't finding anything, I realized that there's something more and deeper going on than what I could handle and what I knew at the time. I realized that this was dangerous and the possibility of malpractice and incompetence could be kind of facing this situation. And I started to panic. So between 2011 and 2013, I became more private. I stopped talking to people about anything related to me. And after my last visit and episode at the ER for heart problems, I decided that I'm going to start being more observant, especially when it came to health, wellness, and family. In 2021, my boss at work, in an exchange or conversation, decided that she felt I was dyslexic. And when I had this exchange with my boss, as anybody would do when you do have family, you talk about, well, this happened to me at work, this happened to me at work. So I broke out of my promise of privacy for my life and I explained this to my psych nurse stepmom. One of her first recommendations after telling her what I experienced on the job with my boss was for me to report it to my doctor. And my mind just kind of hit the past in 2012, 2013 when she made the same mention of speaking to a doctor. So it's funny how the world works and how life works. When you pay attention to details and you analyze your surroundings, you start to see everything that people are doing around you. And when you observe these details, you're able to protect yourself. This is how being perceptive works. I asked my stepmom why she would think that I should talk to a doctor about being harassed by my boss at work, where my boss was telling me she thought I was, having a disability. And her response was, if you want to take it to court or you want to have proof or evidence that this situation was stressful for you, you should take it to your doctor so it's on your files. Okay, so listen to this very carefully. Anything happening that seemed like it could be used for evidence at a future time, my stepmom felt that it would be great to take it to the doctor so it's recorded. I did not want to do something like that because around that time, all the antics that were happening around this neighborhood with neighbors at work all pointed to something that looked like a setup. In 2021, we're still in quarantine at that point. A lot of people are not working, everything's closed. And so a lot of the doctors and nurses were communing together and disseminating information on how to move forward in their jobs, with a lot of layoffs happening for nurses and doctors not taking their injections. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to bring up the word. And so doctors were sharing all kinds of information just so that doctors and nurses and medical professionals can know exactly what it is that they were dealing with, how to navigate their jobs, what to do when it comes to protective equipment on the job. And so my stepmom would share newsletters and information with me about what doctors were doing in the industry just to protect themselves. One of the pieces of documentation she shared with me is a form, and the form is called the Blocking Access to My Drug and Pharmacy Information application. So this specific form is something you fill out with the government Health Canada Ontario. You fill it out so that it blocks anyone from being able to see your personal pharmacy and drug use for medical treatment. And I saw it and I said, you know what? I think I want to fill this form out because I want to protect myself from anybody observing my medical records in that way. And anyone listening to this who doesn't understand what it's like to be in the midst of staged interventions, false situations, setting people up to feel or behave or look a certain way on camera or for use to incriminate someone, anyone who's never been through this type of situation, you'll say, well, why is this person doing this and why are they overthinking and paranoid? The reason why I decided to do this is because I started feeling apprehensive about my stepmom's position in the medical field and the types of things or information she's privy to. As soon as I told her that I filled out this form and I sent it in, one of the first things she said is she could look at my medical records whenever she feels like it. And she laughed. And I thought, that's an interesting response. She's like, oh wow, like you really think ahead. And she said to me, you know, I can still look at your medical records if I want to. And I thought, wow, that's a very odd response for someone who works in the medical field that is a family member. My spidey senses kicked in like, there's something going on that shouldn't be happening. She thinks I don't pay attention, so she'll say things that look very and sound very suspicious. I proceeded to have my personal details blocked, especially after she said she could look at my medical records if she wanted to. Now this gets deep. I felt that what was happening around me was a focused effort to make me seem or look mentally unstable or sick. So instead of relying on family, I remained mum on all topics related to my personal life and my medical history. After this conversation, my stepmom began to call frequently and ask me if I was okay, and she would keep saying that she's checking up on me. I think that's the key word here. She kept saying she was checking up on me, and I kept wondering, how come all of a sudden she's checking up on me and not just calling me to say hello? Eventually, after getting these type of fake checkup calls, I began to ignore her calls. From then onwards, she made it her mission to capture me in a weak, frantic, slow, or mentally challenged state. So an example of this is I had a really bad backache um, maybe about a year or two ago. My back was so bad, it was hurting a lot. And I'll never forget, I couldn't sit up. And she knew that I wasn't feeling well. She knew I was in a lot of pain. And her and my sister decided to take a picture of me with this extreme back pain. And my sister raised my arms up above my head. And I told her, like, why are you guys taking a picture of me when I look like this? You know I'm in a lot of pain and I don't feel well. And they both laughed, which I thought was really odd. I realized also that what was starting to happen to me was something that happened to us as a family. And I felt like my stepmom had done this when she had done this to my dad when things were rocky. And I realized too that because she painted a narrative of my dad to look a certain way, she thought it would be just as easy to paint a narrative about me the same way. And the biggest difference between myself and my dad is my dad had a really bad temper. Me, on the other hand, I was more even. So I didn't really respond. I would just observe. When I didn't know or realize what was happening, it was easier for her to get away with setting up specific situations. But once I knew and I understood what I was dealing with, it was a challenge for her to get me to respond a certain way, and it became a challenge for everyone involved to get me to respond a certain way, including my siblings. And that challenge is what helped me to prepare myself for whatever could happen in the future. So, with all that being said, I think what it is that I want to mention about this strategic psychological strategy is that being observant is probably one of the most important things that you'll ever experience. You can't just only pay attention to what's happening in front of you. You have to look at everything around you. You have to watch to see who's involved because it's a team effort. It's not just my family only. Multiple people are involved. One of the biggest things that I recommend to anybody who's going through this is as these scenarios are being set up around you, you also have to take notes and make observations so it becomes easier to connect all the information together. Another one of the things I always recommend, and a lot of coaches and leaders in this practice of protection from narcissistic abuse, is respond, don't react. So when I started to see what was being done to try to instigate, to make me respond a certain way, I even got more quiet and I got more observant and I started taking more notes and then I started getting names and dates and times. That way, one, if you're going to write a book like I'm doing right now, you have all the details in the book. And even if you're not writing a book, when it comes time to tell your story, you have specific scenarios attached to whatever's happening, and you can easily pull out the details and say, this is what happened. Whatever it is you're going through, however intense the scenario is, stay grounded, know who you are, know what you're dealing with, breathe, and do not be afraid. Thank you.